My name's Rachel, and I run London Loo Tours, which I'll be telling you all about. Full disclosure, I don't have a science or an NTD's background. I'm very much an arts person who's sort of stumbled into science by accident, so I'm learning as we go. And my plan today is to spend the first half talking a little about what I do, where I come from, and what tools I bring to the table. And then, very selfishly, I'd like to open it up to a group discussion, because I think we have a unique mix of people in the room today, and so I want to see what you all get out of it. But first, very quickly, because this is an interactive workshop about toilets, and which always scares people away. I want to find out who I've got in the room. And the way I like to do this, I do this with kids, but as I was saying before, I think grown-ups should get to have fun too. So I'm going to do my interactive baseline study. So you'll need to get on your feet. Very good. Very simple game. I'll make a statement or sometimes two statements, and I want you to imagine that there's a line across the room. This line is a spectrum. And you will place yourself on this invisible spectrum based on how much you agree or disagree with the statement. So we'll start with a really simple one just to warm up.
Which is the heart, top, and the bottom of the
I will tell you for each question, because some of them are agree, disagree, some of them are two separate statements. So really simple one just to warm up. I love London, I hate London. If you're smack in the middle, then you are pretty ambivalent about London. Oh, fantastic. We have no London haters. That's good. Cool. You're the farthest over. So I'm going to pick on you. Who are you? What do you do?
So I'm Laura Olivares, and I work as a graphic designer in a science center. So kind of like communicating science visually, comics or illustrations.
Awesome. And why do you love London more than anybody else?
Well, I lived there, and I just really enjoy it. You didn't have. I live in Cambridge now, but I used to love you didn't have to plan the weekends. Things would just happen, and you would just go and let's go.
Brilliant. Yes. Let's see. You're my farthest. You're so I'm going to pick on you. We all heard from you earlier, so we know who you are.
So I was born in London. Mm-hmm. I live in Cheshire now, so I live in a rural.
Escapee.
So I'm ambivalent.
Yeah, I go back and forth depending on how crowded the tube is on any given day. I think this morning I was over there. And I'm like, all right, let's see, I have to look at my questions. So getting more into the reason we're here today, because I want to see who we've got. I am a scientist, I am an artist, and anywhere in between. Scientist, artist. Ooh. Good. I like this. I like this. All right. Yes. No judgment. Yeah. Then you get picked on. All right. Well, just to mix it up then. You're right smack in the middle.
I am smack in the middle
Yes.
Because I originally come from the sort of the more medic side of things, but at the moment I'm more a manager, but I'm very interested in the communications thing, so I'm sort of putting myself in the middle.
Fantastic. And who are you and what do you do?
I'm
just so we know.
at the moment working on an eye care organisation called CSD, and I'm based at London School.
All right, fantastic. All the way in the back, because you. Yes, right here.
So I'm Willemese Noordijk. I'm working at Merck, the German Merck. We just saw the presentation of one of my colleagues, and I'm responsible for the Quasi-Quantum donation program. Quasi-Quantum is the drug that treats schistosomiasis, so that is diseases.
And why have you put yourself smack in the middle?
Well, because I'm not a scientist, and I'm not an artist. So
interesting. So you're.
So I'm more a generalist, I would say. Okay. My background is international relations. So I've dived in, health, and so yes. So I can't really define myself in either or the other.
Brilliant. And I'll pick on one more person.
My name is Margie. I'm a MSc student of public health at the London School. So I'm more on the science side because I'm studying science at the moment.
Brilliant. And one last question on our spectrum, and then you can all sit down. I use humor a lot in my work. I take my work very seriously. Very humorous, very serious. Oh, very good. Yep. You're allowed to move to, as we discussed, if somebody says something and you think, oh, actually, I should be over there. Go. Oh. Try to figure out where you'll get picked on the least. Yeah. Let's see. Who haven't I heard from? Haven't heard from you yet. You're more on the humor side. Who are you? What do you do?
My name's Larry Chan. I'm from Moreover Limited. Our company make videos, so we get to use film humor, and I don't take myself too seriously. So.
And you're more towards the serious side. Yes, you, right in the front.
No,
I look for the, or you're right in the middle.
Very seriously
Okay.
at all. My work, though, is pretty, other than office humor, there's not a lot of humor in the work itself.
Yeah.
So, and my name is Aaron Hoyles. I am program manager at the Synergist, one of the projects at Britannia, which I'm representing here. We do strategy and business development for them.
Fantastic. And one last person, because you're right in the middle, in the polka dot blouse. Yes, you.
Okay, so I'm Jodie Fay. I work at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, so we counterbalance the London School nicely here today, I think. And I'm responsible for oversight of NTDs in the Liverpool School. I'm not a scientist, nor am I a arty person, although I'd like to be more arty, but I'm not from there. I also live in Cheshire, so I'm very happy to come to London, but I'm very happy to go home too.
Yes. All right, fantastic. You may sit down. Whew, that's the scary part done with. I think I didn't say at the beginning, I just got in from California last night, so I'm very jet lagged. So if I'm stranger than normal, that's why. But we're going to go into the me talking part of the workshop. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, what I do, how I use humor, and then we'll open it up. But the first thing I wanted to introduce was this headline that I saw about the year I graduated. So I did a master's degree in what's grandly termed applied theater, which is essentially theater for social justice, education, any theatrical use that has some sort of social justice. And I was trying to figure out what to do with my life and not quite sure. And then I saw this headline in the Evening Standard that said, young engineers are more likely to be inspired by Iron Man than Brunel. And I love that in the caption they say, Iron Man inspired Kingdom Brunel and Iron Man right, just in case you're not sure. That is their caption. But it got me thinking, because I'd been feeling like, I should do something useful with my life. And then I remembered that stories actually inspire people. They give people ways of looking ahead. And one of the most interesting talks I've ever done was actually about toilets at the World Science Fiction Convention. And we talked about, how science fiction can look not just up to the stars, but also at the world around us and imagine what else it could be. So that's sort of very much where I'm coming from, is liking to imagine different ways of how things could be. My favorite question is, what do you do for a living? Because I get to tell people I give tours of public toilets. And then they say, sorry, what? And then I get to explain. So usually 4 or 5 days a week, I'm walking around London with my toilet plunger, talking about toilets. And this all started because when I moved to London, I really didn't like to pay to use the loo. I was always out as a tourist. I was on a student budget. And 50 pence was sometimes the instant noodle pot that was going to be my dinner. So, you can have a wee, you can eat dinner. And I come from a country where you don't pay to use the loo. It's a God-given human right. So I was shocked by having to pay. And this obsession got a little bit out of control. I was looking into being a tour guide, and I kept mentioning, I know where all the free toilets are. And eventually somebody said, you talk about toilets an awful lot. Do a tour of that. So which initially I went, how? We'll go and we'll pee for 3 hours. It'll be great. Which is not what the tour is today. If you come along, you'll be glad to know there are a lot of stories, but there is also practical advice. But it got me interested, so I started exploring, went around looking at a lot of toilets, got a lot of weird looks, and eventually founded London Loo Tours, which has now been running for 5 years. And Loo Tours is a walking tour, or now 3 walking tours actually, that are all about toilets and things that relate to them. And what I discovered in doing this is that the toilet is sort of this marvelous gateway, if you will, into gender politics, into health and hygiene, into architecture, into psychology. So all of that sort of came together in the tours. And I feel very lucky to have started from a place where I just went, toilets, I want to know everything about all the things about toilets. And so I find myself in all these weird different groups. I know people who are really into collecting Victorian toilets, and I get to come to things like International Society of Neglected Tropical Disease conferences because of the wash elements of my work. And one thing that I love to do is find the links between those. But the thing I love most about the tours is the enjoyment factor. These are just some of my guests from over the years, all smiles. And people usually come along not quite knowing what to expect, but everybody loves toilet humor, whether they admit it or not. And so it's a really interesting hook, and people will come, expecting some jokes. I don't tell jokes. I know one joke, and it's really bad, and I only tell it if things aren't going well. And we sort of hook them in with the fun stories, and then we can sneak the more serious stuff in. So we start with, the ancient Romans had communal toilets. You can go there with your mates, talk politics, and they wipe their bottom with a communal sponge on a stick. And that's some people's takeaway, and that's fine. But we do try to get the more serious stuff in there, which we're then able to do, and people get really interested in a way that they wouldn't if we started with, 2.5 billion people worldwide don't have toilets, and that's the #1 killer, which is important, but that sort of makes people go, okay, don't want to know. So I've also got involved with things like I got to go to the World Toilet Summit in 2013. If people haven't come across Jack Sim, very interesting guy. He founded the World Toilet Organization, which is an organization that traveled around to different developing countries trying to provide better sanitation. It's been interesting talking to people about him, actually, because he's very much a showman. He's a Singaporean entrepreneur, and some people feel like he's a bit too much about himself and the silliness of it, and he doesn't connect it. But having met him, I think he's doing some fantastic stuff. But coming back to the humor, because that's why we're here. One thing that fascinated me with Loo Tours is after the tour, we usually finish in a pub, and I would get 10 people who didn't know each other at the start of the tour sitting there talking about toilets for an hour, which doesn't normally happen with 10 people who didn't know each other. And they would open up. They would talk about their toilet behaviors and things that had happened and bladder and bowel conditions. And so I started to wonder what makes this happen. And I'm not currently an academic. I keep getting pulled back to it. But I've sort of done some soft research around this just because I'm intrigued by what makes an environment where people can talk this openly about something that's often very taboo and serious, and you wouldn't talk about it with people you don't know. And what I keep coming back to is that humor element, the fact that we've started with a soft approach and opened it up. Now, humor is a double-edged sword. It can be used to open things up. It can also be used to shut things down. And if you'll forgive me a bit of pretension, I've got a quote here from George Bernard Shaw, famous English playwright. He wrote, "English decency is a rather dirty thing. It is responsible for more indecency than anything else in the world. It's a string of taboos. You must not mention this, you must not appear conscious of that. And the consequence is that everything that must not be mentioned in public is mentioned in private as a naughty joke." And this is actually from an essay about toilets. George Bernard Shaw was a passionate campaigner for many women's issues, including more on-street toilets, because ladies weren't supposed to have bodily functions until about 1910. It wasn't done. And so he wrote about the need for women to be able to participate in society. And he uses this quote in the context of the all-male committee who were making the decision of whether to install these toilets for ladies, and they turned it into a joke and used that to shut it down. And actually, the toilets in question are in Camden Town. If you ever happen to come out Camden Town Station, toilets for gents, toilets for ladies. And when the ladies' toilets were proposed, the councillors called it an abomination They said that persons who so far forget their sex as to have bodily functions out in public should not have anything provided for them at all, but they couldn't shoot it down on health and safety grounds because it's the 20th century, we're getting a little bit slowly more progressive, almost got the vote. And so they did a very British thing and they played the health and safety card and said the proposed site might be an issue because it would obstruct traffic. And so what they did, these very clever counselors, was they built a wooden structure the same size and shape as the proposed facility, and somebody tipped off the local cabbies, so that day every vehicle that drove by crashed into that toilet, just hard enough to prove that ladies' toilets would be a problem. And they were not built. So it's been a long, slow battle. But it's coming back to humor again. This is something that I always try to be really conscious of when I'm thinking about the stories I tell. Are they helping the cause, or am I talking about another culture that I'm not part of that seems funny to me but actually is very serious? So I want to go into some theories of humor now, some of the tools I've drawn from. And I do have to say, I don't usually sit there and think, right, I'm using this particular theory as I go. It's something I come up with what I'm going to talk about, and then later I come back and analyze it. But humor basically allows us to approach these uncomfortable topics. It relieves stress. It relaxes us all. And if you were in the presentations today, at least for me, the most engaging ones were the ones where there were interesting, funny elements. Again, coming back to what was said at the very start about we're very good at data, but the stories sometimes suffer. The benign violation theory of humor, which is by a guy named Peter McGraw, who wrote a fabulous book about what makes things funny. And the benign violation theory is his theory, which is that we laugh at things that are wrong yet okay, threatening yet safe, confusing yet makes sense. So you've got the violation part, something that under normal circumstances might not be funny, but you have something that's benign that makes it okay, and humor occurs when those two things overlap. So a lot of jokes, in and of themselves, if you had the non-funny part of it, it would be quite gross or quite weird, but you flip it on its head. So you throw something in that makes it okay. And this is something I'd love to explore in terms of neglected tropical diseases and diseases in general, because those very much fit the violation part of this. They're not funny. They're very serious for many people, but are there things that are benign that you can introduce as a way of talking about them, of making them okay, of taking away stigma? Stand-up comedy is another thing that comes into my work a lot. I'm not a comedian. I took up a stand-up comedy course once, and it became very apparent that I was never going to have a career in it. I'm more of a weird funny than a ha-ha funny. But it's one thing that I think everybody who's involved in public speaking and presenting should do. Because what stand-up comedy is about is two things. The first thing is efficient communication of information. So one of the first things our teacher said to us was you want to get a laugh every 10 seconds. So you have to think about what's the minimum information people need to get the joke. Don't tell a long story. Do your setup line, your punchline, move on to the next thing. And I found that really helpful, though you wouldn't know it today from my jet lag, in thinking about how I communicate information. The other thing that stand-up comedy has going for it is that comedians put themselves on a level playing field with their audience. So you have to be intellectual equals with people because you're sharing things. It's not a I am superior to you and you will bow to me, because that's usually not very funny. It's funnier when somebody is positioning themselves at an equal place to you, and that comes back again to how experts communicate. How do they break those barriers, find the things that put them with the knowledge they have and acknowledging the knowledge they have, but on a level playing field. The other element of my work is clowning, and I love clowning. Now, when most people think of clowns, they think of red nose, curly rainbow hair, squirty flowers. That's not what we're talking about here. So let's be clear. Clowning is, at its heart, about vulnerability. And so clowns are optimistic. Clowns are solution-seeking. Usually a clown will take a different approach to a problem, and you root for them because you want them to succeed. And I think, again, in terms of, especially talking about stigma, this becomes very interesting because people are in a very vulnerable position, and clown work sort of allows you to take ownership of it. So right now I'm actually in the process of developing some work with a group of young people with Crohn's and colitis and bowel disease, using clowns to find ways to talk to peers and talk to teachers and mentors about their condition in an empowering way and shared vocabulary. So that's the role that clowning has. Depending on our time, we may play a game. The last thing I want to introduce is the permission object. I have my permission object, which is a toilet plunger. And a permission object is something that allows people to break social norms, to engage in a different way than they normally would. So for example, I've got up here if you put on a superhero cape, regardless of your age, you will probably want to run around singing Batman. And what I found with this is that because I'm carrying it, it gives people an opportunity to say, what's that for? Why do you have that? And then, just like with the humor and the storytelling and the tours, the barriers are broken. They will tell me a story, sometimes a very intimate story about a toilet experience they've had. So finding things that give people a chance to look at the world differently, I think is quite powerful. So, things to consider. When you're using humor, and we were talking about this a little bit before in a small group on the side, for anyone who's working in different cultures, cross-cultural humor becomes very interesting because not every culture has the same humor. And so you want to think about, who are you communicating with? What's your message? Who's your messenger? What's the desired reaction? And what's your shared sphere of reference? What are things that you can both relate to? Because that's where any humor that you have can start. I want to show a couple examples here. These are both examples that are targeted at a Western audience. So there's something, one of them's a fundraising video. So this is a WaterAid video. The other one's actually an advertising video. But this was a video that WaterAid made. Where are we? Whoops. Pooping unicorns a second. Sorry. A couple of years ago to raise awareness about lack of toilets.
Rented out the office toilets to an internet startup. Office cutbacks, I'm afraid. We've rented out the office toilets to an internet startup, so we're going to have to build our own on the main office floor space. Think of it as a team bonding exercise. I'm not expecting any complications, but if there are any nasty bugs going around, we'll set up a sort of quarantine in Dennis's office.
This will be our new laboratory.
Some of you may contract a fatal disease due to bad sanitation, but we're having cutbacks anyway, so it'll be like killing two birds with one stone.
Is anyone thinking about runoff?
It will be extra work, but 1/3 of the world lives like this, so bound to be some positives. And when is Sharon coming back? Is cholera like a 48-hour thing, or is it going to be longer?
See the uncut film and win stuff online now. wateraid.org/loo.
The second example of comedy used in messaging is actually to sell a product to Westerners. And I'm going to show this, and then, because I'm very aware of time, we're going to open up to discussion so you guys have some time to chat. So has anybody seen the Squatty Potty video? Yes, one. Rest of you.
This is where your ice cream comes from. The creamy poop of a mystic unicorn. Totally clean, totally cool, and soft served straight from a sphincter. They're good at pooping. But you know who sucks at pooping? You do. That's because when you sit on a porcelain throne, this muscle puts a kink in the hose and stops the Ben & Jerry's from sliding out smoothly. Is that a problem? I don't know. Are hemorrhoids a problem? Because sitting at this angle can cause hemorrhoids, bloating, constipation, and a buttload of other crap. And seriously, unicorn hemorrhoids? The glitter gets everywhere. But what happens when you go from a sit to a squat? Voila! This muscle relaxes and that kink goes away faster than Pegasus laying sweet sherbet dookie. Now your colon's open and ready for battle. That's because our bodies were made to poop in a squat, and now there's a product that lets you squat in your own home. Introducing the Squatty Potty. No, Squatty Potty is not a joke. And yes, it will give you the best poop of your life, guaranteed. I don't just mean you bloated lords and hemorrhoidal ladies. I mean everyone. Kink, unkink. Kink, unkink. It's simple science, really. Can't get the last scoop out of the carton. With the Squatty Potty, you get complete elimination. Spend too much time on the chamber pot? The Squatty Potty makes you go twice as fast or your money back. I scream, you scream, and plop, plop, baby. Maybe you're sore from squeezing out solid globs of rocky road.
So this one,
Squatty
we're
Potty
halfway
gives you-
through. It goes on along the same vein, but you get the flavor, if you will. And I love this commercial because it's found a creative and even tasty way to talk about pretty gross bodily function. And there's a whole behind-the-scenes video of how they came up with this concept. But in our last few minutes before the next group invades, I do want to make time for a little bit of feedback and hearing from you guys. So I have a few questions to get us started. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the above. Do you have examples? Have you seen or used effective humor in public health messaging, or examples of things that didn't work or were a little bit misguided and what made them work or not? Reflections on topics from today, questions from me, and thoughts you'd like to explore further. We have about 2 minutes. Go. Yes.
Okay. In my previous lives, I come from being a nurse in a health hospital in the UK, so I went overseas to work in community health. And primarily, when I first went overseas, it was all around maternal and child health issues. And so I'd be with a lot of women, and we'd end up absolutely falling around laughing because often, I'd be asking them why can't they do certain things, and they'd be telling me it would be so obvious to them, like it would be stupid. Why would somebody have to ask? Because their long day, their lack of water, distance, all the things that we all know about actually, and we'd all end up laughing. And then when I went out, normally maybe not that day, but the next day, all the men would be asking me. They would really be worried that we were talking about them. And sometimes we were, but usually we weren't. But it was the issue that I think especially in single-sex groups, you can learn an awful lot of humour, that you need to realise that the other group that's not there, in this case it's very clear, male, female, bi, might be worried, what were you laughing about? They couldn't hear the laughter, they couldn't hear the conversations, and so I think you have to realise that sometimes you might be laughing with a subsection of the population, but you need to realise that the rest of the population want to know what you're laughing about, because they're very worried you're actually laughing. And I have been in situations where, yes, I mean, in the UK where you can be laughing about another so you need to think how do other people.
Yeah. I'm curious, once you told the men, or if you did tell the men what you were laughing about, did they find it funny too, or did they have such a different sphere of reference?
They couldn't understand what we'd been laughing about.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you for that.
So they still thought there was something else. I'm sure they asked the women directly what we were laughing about.
Thank you for that. If everybody's quiet, then I have to tell my joke, and it's a really bad joke. really, really bad.
I think it's quite interesting because I've seen humour on product news. It doesn't translate. I think there's a thing at the moment in the UK about a comedian who's been prosecuted in Scotland because he was getting his pet dog, if I read the article correctly, to do a fascist salute. And a comedian wrote about it. It's a very interesting article saying about actually, I don't find that humour, I was going back to your point of the opening, I don't find that humour funny myself, but it's kind of, I defend the right to have a bad sense of humour, I wouldn't necessarily repeat it myself. So kind of tension.
Sounds like a thing John Cleese would say.
Yeah, we kind of, on the commercial front, there is a toilet cartoon that we did with a song that I'll send you a link to.
Please do.
It's actually quite amusing. It's a kids' education piece, I think. So we kind of use it at times in the commercial world, but that I have to say was quite out of the norm for what normal kind of work that we do.
Yeah.
Kind of ossified by the gravity of the brief.
Yeah. We were talking about this before too, about how with kids messaging you get a lot of humor and fun, and once we get to grown-ups we feel like they should just be able to accept the statistics and the serious stuff, when actually sometimes I think there is a bit of a role for humor. On the stuff that some people find funny and some people don't, which is true of every joke ever told, that it will be too close to home for somebody. One thing that actually interests me about the WaterAid video is that's probably not very funny if you live in a country where that is your norm, so the one where they're building the toilets in their office. It works well and sort of works along the lines of what I do as far as getting Westerners in on a situation that seems ridiculous and then flipping it and going, actually, this is people's daily lives and it's not funny. But if you wanted to raise awareness in another country about behavior, that approach probably couldn't work. So one thing I would have loved to do if we had more time is workshop that and think, how might we make a similar video, but that would be engaging for a WASH program in a place where it's actually happening. But I see people congregating outside, so I think it's time for me to release you guys. Thank you very much for coming. I hope that's been